Hello and good afternoon. I'm just going to wait a couple of seconds or a minute or so to see if anybody else is joining before we get started. Right, welcome. I'm just giving a couple of seconds to see if anybody else joins before we get started. Okay, looks like everybody's in. So let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. We are going to talk about eviction notices and rent relief this afternoon. This is our landlord-focused webinar. Tomorrow, we will have a tenant-focused bilingual webinar going over the same topics, but it will be also translated in Spanish. All right, and before we get started, just a little reminder that city staff is not able to offer any legal advice, but we can offer best practices and an overview of the city actions regarding the CSFRA, which is our rent stabilization law, and other state laws such as the eviction moratorium that we will be talking about today. All right, so my name is Andrea Kennedy and I work for the city of Mountain View. Also on the line with us is Joanne Pham, who will be doing the second half of the presentation. So she'll be popping in just a minute. We do have other staff members on our team who you may be familiar with. We have Patricia Black, who is in charge of a lot of our petitions, Anki Van Dersen, who is our program manager, and Jessica Spikes, who is our secretary. So before we get started, let's just go over how the webinar is going to work. So me and Joanne will be giving the presentation, and then you all as the audience members can use the Q&A, or if you would prefer, you can raise your hand and you can ask your questions that way. So we will be moderating the questions and providing answers. We'll take pauses during each section, and we'll also stay for questions at the end. And just one other thing, since we are on Zoom, if anything happens or we lose connection and the webinar sort of shuts off on us, please just log back in using the same link and we'll pick up where we left off. Knock on wood, that does not happen, but it has happened in the past. So just log back in if you can. All right, so anytime you see this screen here, we will be pausing for a question break. Again, you can use the Q&A, raise your hand. If anybody's joining us on the phone, you can just dial *9 and we'll patch you through to speak. You'll notice on the bottom right, we have our contact information there, so you can write that down as well and keep that for your records. All right, so we'll be talking about a couple things today. We'll first briefly go over the eviction moratorium. It has been ended for a while now, so I might skip through some of that pretty quickly unless you have a lot of questions about it. And then we'll spend some time going over the eviction process in California, small claims court, and then we'll have Joanne. She'll be talking about more about COVID-19 Tenant Relief Act and sort of some of the things that entails. Okay, so let's start with some background. All right, so we're gonna take a look back in time here, back to August when the California Eviction Moratorium, the COVID-19 Tenant Relief Act was put in place there. It did get extended a couple times in January, and then again in June. And then it finally was set to end at the end of September. So September 30th, 2021 is when it ended. And then we moved into a period which is known as the Rental Housing Recovery Act. And so that started in October of 2021, and it's ending in a couple days here at the end of March 31st, 2022. So in Mountain View, we have sort of these three connected strategies that we've been using during this COVID-19 period. Number one is the emergency tenant protections that were in place. And number two is connecting people with available emergency rental assistance to keep them in their houses, and also to make sure that our landlords are getting paid and then able to then pay their bills. And then also we're offering help, in-person help or virtual help at our eviction help centers. So we'll talk a little bit about each one of those. Okay, so let's start out with the eviction moratorium, sort of where things began. And so this was a statewide eviction moratorium that was put in place to provide eviction protections for tenants who could not pay their rent because they were financially burdened because they were experiencing COVID-19 hardships. But that did end, again, that ended at the end of September, so September 30th, 2021. And so if you had a tenant who was unable to pay their rent during that time, between March 1st, 2020 and September 30th, 2021, the tenant could not be evicted if they did certain things. So if the tenant returned their hardship declaration form, which they should have received if you gave out any notices to pay rent or quit, if they returned that hardship declaration form to you, or if they paid 25% of their rent from the period of September 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2021, by that September 30th, 2021 day, the tenant cannot be evicted for any of that past due rent. They do still owe it, but they can't be evicted for it. Okay, so we sort of broke this down in a couple chunks of time here. So we'll first look at this first period from March 1st, 2020 to August 31st, 2020. And so during that time, the rent cannot be the reason for an eviction if the tenant submitted to the landlord, to you all, the declaration of COVID-19 related financial hardship. So that's during that period of time. During September 1st, 2020 through September 30th, 2021, rent cannot be the basis for the eviction if the tenant submitted the declaration of COVID-19 related financial hardship and they also paid that 25% of the rent due during that period. Right, so during this period, they had to do two things in order to be protected by this law. And then once the eviction moratorium ended, so October 1st, 2021 onward, the tenant's failure to pay rent can once again be a reason for eviction. There are other protections that we'll talk a little bit more about during this time, but the big thing is during the first two time periods, if the tenant did those things, they cannot be evicted for that rent. So there were a ton of different noticing requirements during the eviction moratorium. I'm not going to go through all of them because a lot of them are over 6 months or some of them are a year old at this point. But if you have a tenant that still owes rent during that time, or if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to us and ask. We will also provide a copy of this PowerPoint so you can get some of that information. So here's just some screenshots. These templates were provided on the state's website. So you could put all the required language in there and all the timelines, the 15-day notice to pay rent instead of 3-day, things like that. was all provided for you. It's a copy of the Declaration of COVID-19 Financial Distress Form. Okay, so if you have any questions about those, let us know, but I'm just going to skip over those quickly, and we'll move on now to the noticing requirements for CSFRA covered rental units in Mountain View. Since most of our rental units in Mountain View are covered by our rent stabilization law, I did want to mention this. So if you are a landlord of a property that's covered, you have certain filing requirements. So if you serve a termination notice to one of your tenants, you also need to serve a copy to the rental housing committee or to the city within 3 days of serving that notice to your tenant. And you can file all of these online where you registered your property. Right? You also need to upload a copy of any summons, complaint of unlawful detainer, or if you receive a judgment for an unlawful detainer against your tenant, you need to file a copy with the city within 7 days of serving that to your tenant. Okay, so if anyone's thinking maybe about processing any UD paperwork, make sure that you file a copy with the city, please. All right, also, this one is something that you can do online as well, is to provide written notice to the rental housing committee if the tenant vacates their unit as a result of receiving a termination notice or of receiving an unlawful detainer. And so you need to notify the city that a tenant moved out within 7 days after they leave. So there are a lot of cases where someone will receive a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit, and they say, you know, I can't make it, I can't pay that, so I'm just going to go ahead and move. If you find yourself in that situation, there's a short little form you can fill out online and upload that, and it will satisfy this requirement. So you can do that. The website is mvrent.mountainview.gov. Yeah, and then this is just sort of what the screenshot looks like, where you can upload all your termination notice, or what I call the termination notice follow-up, and that's for the UD paperwork, or if the tenant moves out. All right, any questions about that? I'll look quickly. We also have the chat also, if you wanted to type your questions in the chat or the Q&A. All right, I don't see any. A lot of that is review, so I'll just go ahead and keep going. Feel free to just type your questions in whenever they come to you, and then when we pause, I'll read them. All right, let's talk about the eviction process. Okay, so in California, landlords have to go through the unlawful detainer, or the eviction court, that we like to call it sometimes for shorthand. So you have to go through that process to evict any tenant. There are no self-help lockouts allowed, no changing locks, and no turning off power, no nothing like that. So you have to go through this formal court process. All right, and so a landlord first, before you can get to that process, you do have to first provide that formal written notice, so that formal written termination notice, and then followed by filing an unlawful detainer lawsuit. Right, so again, there's no lockouts unless the court has entered a judgment and you have the sheriff who has posted the notice to vacate. So it is a formal process that has to be followed in this state. All right, so let's look quickly at this little flow chart here. So again, we start off with our eviction notice, and then after that, we can go ahead and get started with the court process. So we start with the summons and complaint for unlawful detainer. If we travel the top line here, you'll see once the tenant receives that UD paperwork, they can provide an answer. They can answer to the court. They have 5 days to do that. If they decide to provide an answer, then there will be scheduled for a trial within 20 days of that. At the trial, both sides can present their evidence, and then there will be a judgment made. Obviously, if the tenant wins, the tenant stays. If the tenant loses, then you'll have the sheriff and the notice for the tenant to be evicted. And then if the tenant decides not to answer the paperwork you provided, we'll follow the bottom line, which is fairly straightforward. If there's no answer, there's just a default judgment where there's just a decision made and the tenant will likely just be evicted there. Okay, so now let's look at the unlawful detainer process for the eviction moratorium time period. Or sorry, right after the eviction moratorium time period. So that would be the period, the recovery period, which would be October 1st, 2021 to coming up March 31st, 2022. Since we're still in this period, we'll talk about it now. So if the tenant owes rent, the landlord must show that they have tried to get rental assistance but did not exceed, or they have to show that the tenant does not qualify for rent assistance. So possibly maybe if they're over income to qualify for a program. Okay, so things that you can show are a statement that the application was denied for assistance or a final decision from the rental decision program, from the rental assistance program. Also, you can show a statement that the landlord applied for rent assistance, but neither the tenant nor the program notified the landlord of the tenant's application submission within 20 days. So if you did your part and then the tenant is not doing their part, you can show that. Or if you have a statement, a lease, or something that shows that the tenancy was established on or after October 1st, 2021, you can show that to the court as well. And those things would allow you to move forward with the process. Okay, so again, that same time period, the court can reinstate a tenancy for a tenant who is still living in the unit if the tenant provides evidence of an approved rental assistance application. And it shows that the amount approved together with any of the other tenants' payments that they made will resolve the rental debt that you're bringing forward in your complaint. Or if the landlord has already received the full amount, then it would not move forward. So something to think about here also is that the state is moving a little bit slowly with processing their applications and getting out money. So during this time period, if the rent application is still pending or it's still in review, then the court will stay the action until a final decision is made on the tenant's application. So we're hoping that some of those applications will get processed a little bit faster, but at this time, it can still take a little while. All right, so starting in September, there is this required program flyer. Anytime a landlord is bringing an unlawful detainer summons, so you want to provide this with your paperwork, and it's just a resource, a landlord tenant assistance resource flyer. So if you need a copy of that as well, I believe you can find it on our website, or you can just contact us and we can get you a copy of it. All right, any questions about any of that? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about small claims court, and then we'll talk about the COVID-19 rent assistance and sort of what that's looking like and when that's ending. Okay. So the small claims court process is a process we're going to have to look at when we're talking about rent that was protected by the eviction moratorium, right? So if the tenant submitted their declaration form and they provided that 25% of past due rent during the September to September period, then they would be covered by the eviction moratorium, and they can't actually be evicted, so you wouldn't be going to eviction court. But if you want to get, or if you need to get that past due rent paid, you would have to take the route of small claims court. Okay, so starting November 1st, 2021, landlords can use a small claims court to collect any past due rent for these specific types of cases. All right, but similarly, since there are these pretty big programs that are providing rent assistance, landlords would have to show that they made an effort to obtain rent assistance. So they would have to show somehow that they made an effort to investigate and look into available rent assistance options, that they did their part in applying, and that they also cooperated with the tenant's effort to obtain rent assistance. I know many of, even our local program requires some landlord participation in order to receive that assistance. All right, so the award can be reduced if a landlord does refuse to participate in the rent relief application from the tenant. All right, and just something that the city always suggests is that communication between tenants and landlords is very, very important. So please, if you have looked into rent assistance, or if you know your tenant may benefit from it, or if you have gone ahead and submitted an application for their unit, please notify them as soon as possible and encourage them to apply so that you can receive those funds for that past due rent. All right, so we'll stop there. I think we have a question. Again, type in the Q&A. You can raise your hand, or you can go ahead and type in the chat as well. Okay, so the question is asking which form needs to be filed for an unlawful detainer. So of course you want to start with your notice to your termination notice, your first notice to pay rent or quit. And then you need to file the court paperwork. A lot of the times what we've seen is that people do hire legal representation to fill out this court document, because you do have to be very meticulous and you have to really get all the information accurate so that it can be brought in front of the court and that there's no errors in the paperwork that you're filling out. So it is something that we see, especially with UD filings, that people are hiring representation for that. But also, sort of, if you do that, the other form that is required is this program flyer form. And so right on the top, I'll say Landlord Tenant Assistance Program, and then it has sort of some services that are available and some legal costs, free or low cost services for the tenants. It gives information about rent assistance. And then it's a mediation information here. So this form also has to be submitted if you are serving an unlawful detainer summons to your tenant. So our city staff, we can't give any legal advice, so we can't. Oh, you're welcome, thank you. But we do think, especially for UD paperwork, that it's not a bad idea. And we do see that a lot of people do that. And again, remember, if you are serving your tenant, you do also need to file a copy of that paperwork with the city within 7 days of serving it on your tenant. So If you have any questions about how you upload those documents online, just reach out to me and I can sort of walk you through the online process. All right, I don't see any other questions. So we'll go ahead and pass it over to Joanne.
Thanks, Andrea. And I could share my screen now so that I can just click through myself. Thank you. So we're going over, sorry if this is the wrong screen. Okay, so we're just going over the COVID-19 Tenant Relief Act, which refers to AB 3088. Sorry if you see that. AB 3088, SB 91, and AB 832. And these bills provided eviction protections for tenants during COVID-19 and created the state rent relief program. I do see a question here from Angelica Benuelos, which I can just address really quickly since it seems like it wanted to be asked during the last break. She's asking, if we're serving a 3-day notice, do we also have to file that with the RHC, the Rental Housing Committee? Yes, you do need to provide a copy to the Rental Housing Committee within 5 days, I believe. Is that correct, Andrea?
3 days.
Within 3 days of service on the tenant. Thank you.
Yes, and again, with that same thing, if you have any questions, I can help walk through that process online.
Okay. So just to continue on with this section, as we stated before, there are 3 connected strategies that we're utilizing in the city of Mountain View, including the emergency tenant protections that were in place and are still in place up to March 31st. The emergency rental assistance that is available to both landlords and tenants, as well as our eviction help center to sort of house all of these options and serves as a place where people can go to figure out what's available to them. The emergency tenant protections, as stated earlier in the presentation, allowed for tenants to be protected from eviction for non-payment of rent if that rent accrued between March 2020 and September 2021. But they were protected if they returned a signed declaration of COVID-19 related financial distress form and paid 25% of the rent owed during that time period to their landlord. So rent in this instance would mean the monthly rent amount, as well as any other financial obligations under the lease, such as utilities and late fees. The emergency rental assistance program through the state rent relief program covers 100% of past due rent and utilities to make landlords whole and allows tenants to stay in their home. For rent assistance, it can help both parties avoid eviction court and small claims court. Both landlords and tenants can apply for the California COVID-19 rent relief program, but if your resident needs additional assistance, the Community Services Agency may also have funds that can help tenants pay rent and utilities. Tenant households can qualify for the state rent relief program if their income is at or below 80% of the area median income for the county. And for Santa Clara County, this chart that we have here on our slide shows what the income limits are based on your household size. So for a single person household, that would be $82,450. And this is still the current chart that's being used by the state rent relief program, since they usually update it around April. At least one adult member of the household has to also be financially impacted due to COVID-19, such as incurring significant costs due to COVID-19 or having a significant reduction in income due to COVID-19. And they must demonstrate this COVID-19 related financial hardship by certifying to how exactly they've been impacted. Through the state rent relief program, households impacted by COVID-19 and earning 80% of the area median income or less are eligible. And as we stated, both tenants and landlords can apply. You or your tenant would receive either 100% of the back rent from April 2020 through February 2022, 100% of future rent, which at this point is now considered back rent, March 2022, and 100% of past and current utilities, April 2020 through February 2022. And sorry, that should also say March 2022 there. So other housing related expenses such as certain relocation costs and hotel and motel costs can also qualify. However, they may be significantly lower prioritized compared to rent and utilities. And we also wanted to update you all with this big piece of news from the state rent relief program. They announced the application portal will be closed to new requests, including new applications and additional fund requests beginning April 1st, 2022. Additional fund requests are recertifications by tenants who are still struggling with maintaining housing stability. So they would essentially recertify to show that they are still requesting rent relief. And the last day to submit a new request for rent or utilities assistance is March 31st by 11:59 p.m., which is in less than 2 weeks now. Submitted applications and AFRs, which is an additional fund request, will continue to be processed after March 31st, 2022 by the state's case managers. So tenants will still be able to review the status of their application and upload necessary documents if the state's case managers deem their documents previously uploaded to be insufficient. And the state rent relief program will only cover unpaid rent and utilities accrued between April 2020 and March 2022. So it is important that the tenant does not pay the actual amount that they've requested in the application. Otherwise, it will not be covered in the program by the program. And unfortunately, at least the amount will be paid, but it just won't be reimbursed by the program at all. And tenants must be prepared to pay rent on April 1st, 2022, since statewide eviction protections related to the COVID-19 pandemic will end. So to determine eligibility, tenants and landlords do have the option of starting this process by phone by texting the word rent to 211-211. And it'll launch you into a series of questions to determine your eligibility, and then we'll take you to the correct website where you would apply for the state rent relief funds. It could take you to a local program if you are not a resident of Mountain View and are not a resident of Santa Clara County. If your county has its own local program that is still using the same funds as the state, but they've elected to basically have their own jurisdiction over it. And this is what the housingiskey.com website looks like, which is where you would apply for the state rent relief program. And over on this left side here, you can see 6 different language options, and I've circled the one for English if you do speak English and prefer to start the process in English. At our Eviction Help Center, we can help educate and assist landlords and tenants with navigating the end of the eviction moratorium. We also provide pre-eviction support to avoid court proceedings, including help with applying for rent assistance, case review, mediation services to negotiate payment plans, and legal referrals. And we also connect tenants with wraparound services to stabilize housing for the long term with our partnership with CSA. To receive assistance with understanding complicated AB 832 rules after September 30th, 2021, starting October 1st, landlords can serve a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit, but that notice must have specific language, as you all may know by now. Tenants can still apply for rent relief to prevent eviction, but they must submit a copy of their application within 15 days of receiving a 3-day notice. And I apologize, it should say that tenants must submit verification that they've submitted their application. They do not have to provide a copy of their application. And details of each case will dictate whether to file an unlawful detainer in unlawful detainer court or in small claims court. And now we'll pause for any questions. And I did see there were some questions in the Q&A, so I'll just go ahead and look at that. So has SB 91 paid for any utilities yet? We haven't. I'm not sure if, Andrea, you've seen any instances, but I have not, and I know that there's a very specific status for showing when someone has been paid for utilities, but I have not seen that status myself on any of the residents that I've come across in helping. That doesn't mean it won't be paid. We actually have a lot of residents still waiting for rent assistance, so that's likely a huge reason why utilities have not been paid yet for each tenant. And so there is an appeal process for when someone is approved for rent or utilities. There's an appeal process to request that something be reconsidered if, for example, they left out $1,000 of the requested amount for some reason. And it seems like utilities right now aren't being appealed because they actually just haven't been paid out yet. So tenants are still just patiently waiting for that. Are there any other questions that anyone has about the current process and what's been going on with the state rent relief program and the new deadline to submit new requests by March 31st? Okay, so we'll just keep going then with the presentation. So we just have some resources that we'd like you all to be aware of, and some of which we've mentioned but haven't provided the contact information. So the first here is our Eviction Help Center. We are back in person at the City of Mountain View's Public Library, which is located at 585 Franklin Street. Previously, if you visited us, we were on the second floor of the program, program room, but we're now on the first floor program room, which is near the front doors by the elevator. And we're open from Tuesdays, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. and welcome walk-ins and appointments during our Tuesday sessions. But on Thursdays between 1 and 5 p.m., we are only taking walk-ins. We are also available to help during evening hours on Thursdays from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., but that is by appointment only. Please feel free to contact us at 650-903-6132 to schedule an appointment, and we can still assist applicants by phone or virtually as well, since we were already doing that during the Omicron surge and can continue to do that for anyone who needs help remotely for any reason. And to enter our Zoom meeting virtually, all you have to do is enter this URL, which is www.mountainview.gov/eviction help clinics. You don't have to register for any, you don't have to register yourself through Zoom in order to enter our Zoom meeting virtually. You'll just simply be launched into the waiting room if we're already in that meeting. So please feel free to visit us virtually. And then finally, our next upcoming webinar is the Eviction Prevention and Rent Relief Program that is tenant focused, which will be tomorrow, March 23rd at 6:30 p.m. And you can register for that at mountainview.gov/rent relief webinars. In terms of rent relief and assistance, these are the contact numbers for our local program through CSA, which, as we've said, has may have other funding sources that can still help tenants with rent or utilities. And then we have that state rent relief program contact information, housingiskey.com, or the same URL would be housing.ca.gov. And then you can also text 211-211 with the word rent in order to start that text process of starting your application. And then next, we wanted to mention that the California Mortgage Rent Relief Program, California Mortgage Relief Program is also available to homeowners who have fallen behind on their mortgage payments due to pandemic-related financial hardship. And they can get there by using the housingiskey.com website, or they can go directly to the application site at camortgagerelief.org. Household income of all household members over the age of 18 must be at or below 100% of the area median income in order to qualify. And then the homeowner must have at least 2 payments past due by December 27, 2021 in order to qualify. Some other eligibility criteria, which I'll briefly go through, also include the homeowner must currently own and occupy the property in California as their primary residence, and they may only own and occupy 1 property. So this may not be an ideal solution for landlords. However, it's a good solution if you are a homeowner who is just trying to listen in on your options here today. And if you're interested in knowing about more of the eligibility criteria, they are listed on that californiamortgagerelief.org site. And this is where you can see the button to go to the application on the Housing is Key site. And again, there are 6 language options, but just to let you know, the California department that runs this California Mortgage Relief Program is different than the department that runs the Rent Relief Program. So it's the California Financial and Housing Agency, but the other Rent Relief Program is ran by the Housing and Community Development Department. And here are some HUD tools that landlords and tenants who are impacted by COVID-19 can refer to when coming up with a payment plan or other alternative dispute resolution options for dealing with the outcome from COVID-19 of any financial hardships. And this is the rent registry at mvrent.mountainview.gov that you would go to upload your 3-day notice to pay rent or quit that has been served on your tenants. And then also any banked rent increase notices, tenant buyout agreement forms, or if you want to just simply register properties and manage your properties online, this is where you would go to do that to provide the information to our rental housing committee. And then finally, this is a snapshot of our website, which you could find at mountainview.gov/COVID-19 housing relief. And there's information about our eviction help center here, emergency rental assistance options, mediation and for landlords and tenants, temporary rent reductions and templates to provide temporary rent reductions, affordable housing, and other COVID-19 relief programs. And finally, this is our last session for questions. So if anyone has any more questions, please feel free to raise your hands or submit your questions in the chat or the Q&A box.
All right, I did also want to mention that we are scheduling some April webinars also. So for landlords on April 13th, we'll have another property registration webinar. If you need help uploading things or if you just want to register your property. And then on April 19th at 3 o'clock, we're having eviction next steps and what to consider if you're thinking of serving an eviction notice. So this is going to sort of follow up after this period has ended at the end of March and sort of looking forward into April and what you all should do then if you're thinking about serving eviction notices or termination notices. You can go to our website for a list of upcoming webinars. We're trying to update those now, but that's mvrent.mountainview.gov / what was it, Joanne? I always forget the shortcut, / COVID-19 housing relief. I think that's where we'll have it listed.
Okay. And in case they want our other rent relief webinars, we can.
Yes, rent relief webinars. So I know many people will probably be interested in what to expect in April. And as more information comes out about next steps in the next week and a half or so, we'll be sure to be updating our website and we'll be sure to address that in our next webinar as well. All right, I don't see any other questions. All right, if nothing else, we appreciate you for coming. We appreciate you for staying informed. We do really want to encourage you to share information with your tenants about rent assistance, since they only have a few days left to apply. If they get paid, you get paid, so it's a win-win for everyone. So we really do hope that you share this information. Yeah, we can also send a copy of the recording along with the PowerPoint. So we'll be sure to do that. All right.
I also want to mention, if you plan on, if you're not already participating in this rent relief program, since, you know, as we all know, landlords aren't required to, but if you do, you can ensure a more accurate outcome of the requests that you need to pay off the rent ledger if that tenant is behind on a specific number of months. So we've seen situations where the tenant has accidentally asked for, you know, a little bit too much or a little bit too little, and because of the landlord's participation, it was bumped to what the landlord had written as the request. So it's a really good idea to participate if you're worried about getting the right amount of payment from your tenant's application.
Good point. All right, and of course we help both tenants and landlords at the library, so we hope to see you or your tenants there. We'll be there this Thursday from 1 to 5. Spread the word, and we hope to see you soon. All right, thank you again for joining us. Have a great rest of the day.